Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to a brand new episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and this week we are going to be celebrating the release of broadcast Signal Intrusion. And for this episode, I'm going to be joined by Jacob Gentry and Harry Shum Jr. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I don't want to dilly-dally too much. Usually I chit-chat and sort of ramble on a bit. But for me, I love conspiracy, like thriller type films. And I rewatched the movie again last night after seeing it a few months ago. And it still really gets under my skin. And I've spoken to Jacob like so many times already over the years. So Harry, I kind of want to start with you for this, if that's cool. Yeah. What was it about this project that hooked you? Was it the conspiracy? Was it this character? I'm just curious, sort of, what was it that just kind of was like your reaction was like, yes, I need to do this?
It was a array of things. I think that as a whole, a lot of times when you read a script, you get a certain genre out of it, and then you start to have a kind of a visual of what this movie will be. And reading the script, I had so many questions that, I immediately had to talk to Jacob. And when we got on a call, I remember going on a trip and trying to discuss the script, and we couldn't even finish because it would have lasted like 4 or 5 hours. But what I really loved about the script is this journey of this character, James, and almost in a way of like partially character study and partially of just being in his shoes throughout the whole journey of not knowing, especially where he's going and trying to figure out the clues along with the audience, and as reading it from an audience member's perspective beyond the character. And just the fact that when I went to a deep dive, that these intrusions, existed and they were real and so in so many different ways, but specifically the Max Headroom incident, which was just so eerie. And like you were saying, for this movie, it's very unsettling. And so I wanted to explore that and kind of like the little fears that I had of not knowing, which as an actor, you do want to know as much as possible before going to a project.
Definitely. I'm curious for both of you guys, because, you just mentioned the Max Headroom incident, and I'm actually from Chicago. So I remember hearing about it, but I never saw anything about it. But it was a weird thing that sort of hung over a lot of our imaginations, kind of like, how did this happen? What does it even mean? I'm curious for both of you guys, like when you were coming into this, did you kind of go into that real life incident and sort of poke around to try to figure out like what that meant in reality versus how that kind of uncertainty would factor into this project in particular? Hopefully that makes sense.
I was sort of vaguely aware of it, but going really deep on it was something that was actually really great for informing the movie. Because it's also something that I think a lot of people can relate to, is just going down a rabbit hole of something, you know what I mean? And when I started to dig into it, it's almost like, well, this is how the movie should play, where it feels like like a relatable journey at the beginning before it starts to take more sort of dark and sinister turns. It's like watching him sort of our version of the Max Headroom incident, investigating that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing because it's unsolved. It was something that took sophisticated equipment that would have been really difficult to pull off, and yet they did it for such almost like anarchic, in some ways silly and obscene, like joke, it seemed like. But why would they go through all this trouble to do that? So it just seemed like a cool thing to tell a story about.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. It was me. Heather, you are getting exclusive. No.
Heather, you're so lucky. You got it. You figured it out.
I've cracked it all these years.
Call the FBI. Call the FCC. We got to get everybody on the horn now.
I have a friend who works at WGN. I'm texting them right now. And I'm like, I did it after all these years.
Isn't it crazy? I mean, what Jacob was saying is like, why? It's like that's sometimes when you with intrusions, everyone's just obsessed with it because they just don't have the answers and they just want some sort of conclusion. And I think it says a lot about us as humans. Like we just need answers constantly, just as some trivial and some as big as like life, right? But I think in particular in this one, I think it starts to head down that journey, and obviously our nightmares might turn into dreams, and dreams turn into nightmares. So we sometimes don't know which is which.
Yeah, I think also that speaks to the journey that your character goes on, because the why is what's hanging over him. And then eventually it's sort of the where as well, which I thought was really fascinating. And I was wondering if you talk about sort of getting into the mind of James, because at first, like he's obviously dealing with the aftermath of this traumatic event, but we see him spiral the further that he kind of goes down this rabbit hole. And I was wondering if you talk about that, because I just thought it was really interesting, especially again, as I was rewatching the third act, he's almost as scary as the incidents that he's investigating at a certain point. There's just a moment where like James is almost no longer James in a way. And I was wondering if you kind of talk about like diving into that psychology and trying to find, what it is that really is propelling this guy at that point. Is it really still grief? Is it something else? I just thought it was really fascinating.
Yeah, it's I think what I particularly liked, and I had certain perspectives like going into it that kept constantly changing throughout the filming process, and even going along with talking to Jacob, he would create this environment that was so easy to be immersed in, but at the same time he wouldn't give me a lot of answers. So there was moments where it was very frustrating for me throughout the process, which was very similar to James's journey of not knowing what position to take at that moment. And that was a strange feeling going into, knowing in a film, kind of the ending and where you're heading towards. But this kind of took shape in different ways. And from the script to filming to even getting the ending and having the environment really, I think, lead the way. And sometimes it would lead astray to a place that might not have the answers that is satisfactory for me. So I think it was constantly being in limbo in sort of way, in playing the detective and thinking that you can be. Everyone thinks they can be a good detective. Everyone has a theory, right? And then you charge into that theory and you hope to be right. And when you're wrong, you either give up or you keep going. And I think that was constantly being in that mind frame with James, knowing that there's something that he was avoiding constantly, that he didn't deal with, that he hasn't dealt with. So as those different layers that kind of played within the scope of 90 minutes that a film that we kind of explore these intrusions, explore grief, explore kind of the human condition and where we could end up if we take things a little too far.
Yeah, definitely. Jacob, he mentioned, Harry just mentioned like you kind of withholding some stuff. Was that intentional on your part, really to just keep him on his toes, in terms of the things that his character was going through? And also, because I think for most of us, we've all sort of turned into armchair detectives online, right? Like the internet has given us this sort of vast tool to sort of turn us all into our own versions of James. So I'm just curious, was that sort of intentional on your part, just to really keep that sort of mystery alive within his character and from the perspective that he was coming at it with?
I mean, I honestly wish I could claim that it was as Machiavellian or as sort of method directing as that. But I do think there was some sense of that. There was also a sense of perhaps me not wanting to sort of finalize the answers, because then that would mean that it could perhaps inform the movie or the performance in a way that, I mean, because Harry's such a naturally curious person. He's just, we have these really long talks, and I think that exploring what it could be is actually a lot of the fun of working of working with him. So the minute we sort of start to rest on, well, this is what it is, and then that's it, it's like we kind of maybe leave on the table some stuff that could be really interesting. I don't mean to be too broad about it, but essentially it's like,
yeah,
it's fun to kind of go, well, what if we did the scene like this? You know what I mean? What if we took the meaning and kind of gave it another layer? And I think that has a lot to do, and then working with him, that's actually something that even, as we were shooting the movie, we were just kind of like taking a different perspective on all the scenes so we could really find the best version of it. And since we didn't have a huge amount of time to make this movie, we weren't able to sort of do what I would probably like to do, which is like a million takes of everything, and drive everyone nuts. It's like we had to kind of like have these discussions, outside of the shooting and just sort of discuss and talk about and refine. And it's just also fun to play, it's also fun to just like go, I have a sword. And the other person's like, and Harry's like, I have a shield. And it's like, okay, we fight, it's like our own version
mallets.
of,
we got mallets. We got
mallets. Yeah. Yeah. It's mallet time. Yeah.
It's mallet time.
Yeah. No, it's just like, it's play. It's like, yes, ending the movie, if that makes sense, in a way that like improv comedians do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's interesting here too is because, again, it's sort of, there is a conclusion to this, but ultimately there's still sort of these lingering questions towards the end. And Jacob, I'm just curious from your perspective, because this was based on something that really has no resolution, was that sort of your way of reflecting kind of, we can do all of these things where we go and we look for these answers, but that doesn't always mean that we're going to get the answers that we want. And sometimes we get the answers I don't want to say we deserve, because that sounds weird. But sometimes we think we've gone to a place where we think we know what's happening, but ultimately it's, it could be a little bit bigger than that. And I don't know if that's making any sense. But
absolutely,
I just thought it was really interesting again last night, kind of watching, and in those final moments, and I was just like, I kind of caught my breath a little bit, and I was like, wow, this is a really clever way to sort of show us that, like, there's still so much uncertainty in life, regardless of whether or not we think we actually have the answers.
And will the answers give any kind of closure to your issues when the answers that you were looking for may not have even been the right question, right? It's like what Kelly's character says in the movie. It's like you keep looking for answers so long you forget the fucking question. And it's like, I think that a lot of that is, I think a lot of people can relate to that, because it's like, if you think that this particular thing, once I know this, or once I do this, it will solve all of my problems. And I think there's a sort of lingering, haunting aspect to a lot of these things. The character's dealing with some trauma, some past trauma, and it's, solving a crime is not going to necessarily, in all respects, completely allow him to heal, And I think that is, that's one of the more sort of dramatic, sort of thematic aspects of the movie that's interesting, but also just in terms of like being able to buy it. I mean, how many times have you watched something and it's like they're just really explicit with all the answers, and it's just like, because nothing I or Harry can put in a movie is as interesting as your imagination. You know what I mean? As interesting as what you can think of. I don't want to know what the Kessel Run looks like. You know what I mean? Like attack ships on fire on the shoulder of Orion. I want to imagine that, because if you show it to me, it's not going to be nearly as cool as Rutger Hauer talking about it. Just to take it back to genre movies for a second, it's like, think about how many people are disappointed that the second Halloween, they made this familial connection between Michael Myers and Jamie Lee Curtis, and Laurie Strode. Sorry.
No, I totally get what you mean, because we just had that conversation last night, because we've been watching all the Halloween movies because it's October and stuff. But it was just kind of like one of those things where I'm like, wow, it actually makes no sense. And I say that as somebody who loves Halloween too, where I'm like, wow, that really doesn't make sense within the context of everything that's established in the first movie at all. And yet we bought it. So yeah, I think
Well,
you're completely right on that.
and the last thing I want to say on that is just basically that, and Harry said this really well before, is just like, we really want this movie to be like an active, engaging, like where you get to be an active participant in the movie as opposed to just sort of watching it as just an audience member, just as a remove or something, you know? And I think just like any good, and those are the kind of movies that stick with you, right? Those are the kind of movies that, you know, you continue to talk about and think about. And no matter how you felt about them, there's many movies that I you know, was a little unsure about when I saw, and I just kept thinking about them. And that, I think that is one of the hallmarks. That's what we aspire, hopefully, to get to, is just like a movie that we'll keep talking about and thinking about afterwards, you know, whether it's because of, I don't know why I feel this unsettled, or what's going on with just this sort of logistical part of the narrative, you know? And those, I think that to be an active, engaged participant in a movie can be more fun. And hopefully that will be some, you know, if that's, and people that are interested in that, I think they'll have a lot of fun with this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask because, as I mentioned, I'm from the Chicagoland area. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and basically lived out there for 30 years until I moved to LA. How was your guys' experience shooting in Illinois? Was it fun? Were they good to you? Were, you know, how you know, because what I loved about it is, like, again, kind of speaking of Halloween, like, I love movies that are set in Illinois, but so very few of them actually go to Illinois to shoot. So I really appreciated about that, because you could feel the textures when James is walking down the street that you see when you go through these different neighborhoods, just the appearance of the L trains and things like that. Like, I was just like, yes, this really is Chicago. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, it's going to Chicago. It was a feeling, because I'll say something about Chicago. First of all, on the food scene, is we went to what was the neighborhood? It was like a Polish like kind of neighborhood that we shot the bar sequence, and I just remember going next door and having, I've never had like proper Polish food, and the place, I kept forgetting what it was called. But I was telling everyone, and every crew member started just going there, like lining up. And then I was like trying to tell someone what the place was. I had to look it up, and it was called Tasty Polish Food. That was the name of the restaurant. And I was like, this is incredible. And I feel like it's a very like specific to Chicago. It's like, yeah, we're just going to tell you, it's like, this is great pizza. That's all the place is going to call. Yeah. Anyways, like, but filming there was just cool. The outskirts in Piatone, where we shot a lot of it towards the end, and the fascinating house that, you know, Jacob can go into a little more detail of just, if you're talking about, like, you can't get that at, even if you go to Universal Horror Night. Like, it's literally, it felt like if you touch anything, you might die. And we were crawling all over the floor, and it was just incredible to kind of be in that space, and that really helped, I guess, performance-wise, because there was less that we had to imagine, because it was just literally all there.
Yeah, it's such a photogenic city. Just everything from the disparate forms of architecture, amazing architecture, but also there's and no offense to Chicago, but there's also like a patina of like urban earth tones in terms of like the browns and the grays and the almost like a rust, the beautiful rust of it all, you know? And I think that is just all meant to sort of submerge you into the story. You know what I mean? And Chicago and the surrounding areas like hand that to you on a silver platter. There's just so much characteristics there. And we were lucky enough to work with amazing collaborators from there, like our cinematographer, Scott Deal. You know, he's been in all the film and TV production there for years and years. And he just knows that so intimately. So it was fun for sort of outsiders like Harry and I to kind of bring our perspective of it, and then to also be working with people who are intimately familiar with the environment, so that we can kind of come to something that really, you know, just transports the audience, really is what the goal was.
Yeah. And Harry mentioned that the house in Piatone, How did you guys come across that location? Because it's not exactly like when you look at a map of Illinois, like that's a community that pops off the map at you in any way, shape, or form. But it's funny because like I've really never heard anybody mention that city before, and yet I had a friend who I went to college with who was from there. So I'm like, but that's like literally the only person I've ever known from Piatone ever in my life.
I don't know if the people that own that house know how to work the internet. I don't know. I mean, I'm just kidding. I mean, they were probably wonderful people. But they didn't really even understand what we were doing. They didn't understand why we'd want to shoot there. But yeah, our location manager, Phil, found that place, and we walked in there, and I looked at Sarah Sharp, the production designer, who did brilliant work in this movie. But I said, this is going to be on your reel, but you're not going to have to do a damn thing. You know what I mean? Because it was just the most amazing. And for all those who don't know, it's basically got very strong end of True Detective season 1 vibes, but we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to bring anything. There was just, and it was an amazing place, a little bit hazardous to our lung health, I think, with the mold or whatever. But ultimately, yeah, it was just it. And I'm so glad you just reminded me. I'm so glad we actually like sort of reverse engineered once we found that location, and we made the place that he's going Piatone, because we actually call it Piatone in the movie. I'm glad that we were true to that, because it won't matter to most people, but for like a native Piatonian, they'd be like, oh my God, that's not even Piatone. Have these people even been there? You know, and that's always something, you know, being from Atlanta, which is where like 90% of movies are shot now. It's always really funny when they're just like, yeah, we're going to go from downtown to Stone Mountain in like 5 minutes, you know?
I totally agree with you. Too, especially what I loved is even, and again, I don't know if this was like manipulation on your part or anything, but I think there's a point when you guys roll up when James and Alice roll up to the storage unit, and it has an 847 area code. And I was like, okay. I was like, thank you for acknowledging that, like, there's all these different area codes. Like, just like those little tidbits to somebody can like take you out of something. Cause I'm a weird, I glom onto details way too much. So as soon as I was like, oh, okay, cool. All right, cool. They did their homework. So I appreciated that.
I'm glad to hear that, because I'm like you. I'm totally obsessive about the details. And especially when you're making something where you put any specificity in it, I just want to double check and triple check, because I would hate to, you know, I'm a stickler for that, for sure.
Yeah, I turn into a real James when it comes to that kind of stuff. I know we're already starting to get kind of close on time, but I wanted to talk about the visuals of the androids in this. And Jacob, I want to start with you in terms of talking about like creating the look of them. And just because, again, it's so unlike anything I've seen this year. And they're so striking, the way that you were able to capture these visuals that just, they feel so unhuman and unholy in a way, but like they feel completely authentic. And I was just wondering if you talk, because you worked with Dan Martin, right?
Yeah, brilliant visual effects artist out of the UK. He worked with an actor who's an amazing physical performer named James Swanson, who plays the character, the Spectre in the videos. And it's a mix of both, you know, sort of puppeteering animatronics type things with actual James Swanson, where it's obvious that it's a person, he's playing that. And when it's obvious that and even when it maybe seem like it's an actual android, that is actually James as well. So his performance did a lot with that. And working with Dan was great, because we were just kind of like geeking out on like all the things that we use to inspire this, like the creepypasta Terry the Android, or the actual Max Headroom incident, or even just all kinds of pop culture ephemera from years past and things we've found on the internet and pictures. So that's always like really fun. But I think that the core of it is actually how mundane it is. because that's the one sort of unifying theory that I've found with all of the stuff that really creeped me out was that it was like really, really, really banal, except for it just felt like tilted, like there was an uncanny valley with it. And that, I think, to me, in the other stuff that we used to inspire, was the most unsettling. So that was the goal, was to try to find this sort of, how do we make it like really mundane, but shift it where it just doesn't make sense to your brain. And that's like, it starts to really unsettle you and freak you out. Because if you really break it down, you know, stuff like the Max Headroom incident or the I Feel Fantastic, Terror the Android, it's not like there's like people getting their heads cut off or anything. It's just, you know, it's just
there's no extreme, right? It's like no extreme of
yeah.
Like, oh, this is really scary, or this is kind of like non-threatening. It's like in between, like, I don't know if this is threatening or not. And that's making me uncomfortable because I need to know.
Yeah. No, yeah. I was going to ask what it was like to be across from that, Harry, and just kind of, you know, because there's a certain point where there's involvement of this kind of character. Was that weird? Like, because to me, I'm like, I just don't even know if I could like function beyond just being totally fixated on it, because it really hooks you.
Yeah, I mean, once you get to know him or her, they're great. They're really good friends. We exchange numbers, and you know, we talk once in a while, and it's just like it is just the whole uncanny valley. Like, I didn't really explore that much until I got involved with this film. Just the idea, psychologically, what it does to you, and how it's unsettling, and kind of our relationship to, you know, there's a form of like AI animatronics kind of feel, like it's kind of veered towards that, and kind of our human relationship of what that's, you know, if you believe in it or not, it's to come, right? And I looked at it as the creepiest was the things that would be unexpected, like just things coming out of its mouth, and like, you know, the wigs just kind of being misplaced. It's just those little things that really heighten everything, you know, beyond just animatronics. Is coming from a dancer, I used to study like animatronics and like kind of try and like move like them. But this was on another level. And I think it's really to Dan Martin being kind of in his world, but also creating something that was, like Jacob said, very mundane. And I think when that happens, it becomes like, oh, that could exist in this world in a weird way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask before we wrap, I'm a really big believer that whenever you do something creative, that, you know, obviously you know, put something of yourself into it, you know, whether you're coming at it from a directorial perspective or an acting perspective. But I was curious for both of you guys, you know, looking at your experiences, collaborating together on broadcast Signal Intrusion, you know, and watching it, you know, go through like South by Southwest and everything. And now it's coming out. Like, what has been the biggest takeaway for both of you guys from your experiences, you know, being a part of this project?
Yeah, I'll take that. The most fun I had outside of like making the movie, you know, having really deep kind of philosophical conversations with Jacob and the rest of the cast and crew, is seeing people say, they pick up a drink after they've watched the film and they say, let me tell you what I think the ending means. and they just go on these theories that my mind explodes. I'm like, I didn't even think of that. Like, you're going so deep that you're picking so many little things that I didn't even expect that was even a clue in someone else's eyes and their perspective. And that's why I think like this particular movie is, you know, we made this and we went down this journey, but it just becomes the audience's, it's theirs, and they can take it on and have whatever the outcome they think it comes closest to them. It says a lot more about them than it does about the movie in a lot of ways. So I think that's been the coolest part about this whole journey.
Excellent. How about for you, Jacob?
I have to echo what Harry says. It's been really It's been really, really a fascinating and fun part of the process to sort of hear the audience reaction to it in that way, what he was saying. It also is like very sort of, it's fun because there are a lot of less sort of explicit answers that we kind of peppered in places, and lots of little details that I add that I didn't even tell Harry or anybody else about, you know, there's like all those kind of things. So it's really fun to sort of see people make those, to be engaged with the movie. That's really the most fun thing. I think that another takeaway is obviously getting to work with someone like Harry Shum Jr., who is a fantastic actor. And then the last thing, just a little bit of a, like the only bad thing was just virtual film festivals.
Yeah.
A bummer.
Yeah. You know,
but we are, you know, our movie is playing in select theaters, and we were able to go to see the movie at the Chicago Film Festival, and that was fantastic. So being able to see it with an audience and meet people in person and talk to them, safe distance, was great.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And for those of you listening, for more information on Corpse Club, you can head over to corpseclub.com. And then, of course, for all your daily news and reviews and interviews, you can head over to dailydead.com or follow us over at Daily Dead News on Twitter. Thank you so much to our engineer, Brian, for making us sound awesome. And until next time, everybody, stay scary.